The first intercollegiate athletic event was in 1852. It was a boat race between Harvard and Yale up in Lake Winnipesaukee. The interesting thing about that race was that it was sponsored by a railroad, and that the athletes who competed in it didn't represent Yale and Harvard. Well, while they did, they had nothing to do with the university. It was the sponsorship of the railroad company that brought them up there. They paid the athletes to show up. They put them in hotels, wined and dined them, gave the winners gifts. And so sponsorships have been involved in college athletics since the very inception. All right? It wasn't until the NCAA came around in 1906 that said athletes had to be amateurs. We couldn't pay them. All right? But even after the NCAA's inception, athletes have always been paid. I want to be careful about what it always. There's been payments going to athletes. For example, in the early 1900s, there was a football player at Yale, James Hogan. And James Hogan, for playing football at Yale, got the rights from American Tobacco for all of the cigarette sales on campus. I want you to think about that. You know, we give our star quarterback at Syracuse the Budweiser rights for all the beer sold on campus. So you can imagine how much James Hogan was making when people actually smoked cigarettes. And he had those rights. They were actually called Hogan cigarettes. He also, the athletes were paid out of a trust fund that the university had held and the coach had control over. So it was going on back then as well. Fast forward, once again, the NCAA, when it was in its inception, came up with this amateur model. But it was, for the first 50 years of the NCAA, it was more of a debate society. Didn't have a real power base or a real control over some of these issues. It wasn't until the 50s that the NCAA starts to get some teeth, but it's also in the 50s where the NCAA recognizes that there needs to be athletic scholarships and that schools can offer athletic scholarships to individual players. They don't have to just come to the university for academic purposes. They can get a scholarship to play sports. And so now we're seeing this kind of dilution of this amateur model. And from the 1950s up until the O'Bannon case, when we're going to allow them to greater benefits, we're starting to see this dilution of these rights. And we go into the 1970s, and all of a sudden, if you're a professional athlete in one sport, you can play college sports. So John Elway, professional baseball player for the New York Yankees, making $1 million. Next thing you know, he's the quarterback at Stanford, and that's okay, right? That's okay. So the NCAA, in their rules, has always been a little bit flexible as to what an amateur is. Okay. Once again, fast forward to 2015, and now we've got the O'Bannon case. And Ed O'Bannon is a basketball player. He's challenging the use of his image in a video game. EA Sports football game just came out yesterday. Hope you're all playing. So EA Sports, he's playing. He's over a friend's house. The friend's pointing out that Ed O'Bannon's avatar is in the game playing it. Sam Keller out of Nebraska, Arizona State, group of other players start challenging the use of these avatars without compensation. Cases combined. Eventually the NCAA, EA Sports, Collegiate Athletic, CAA eventually paid $60 million to the student athletes for the use of their rights. O'Bannon, at that point, also challenged whether the NCAA could continue moving forward with other restrictions. And so the O'Bannon case, what they wanted to do, what the judge at the district court wanted to do, was set up a trust so that the athletes could collect when they left school. So we put $5,000 away each year. The athletes could collect on that for every year they had eligibility. Once they finished up their eligibility, they could cash in on that trust fund. The Ninth Circuit said that that's you can't do that. Once we start paying them anything, they become professional athletes, and college sports is about amateurs, okay? But O'Bannon kind of brought in this NIL era because now all of a sudden people are looking at this and saying, wait a second, is this fair to the student athlete? All right? And so Dan is going to take us from here.
Thanks, John. So, I mean, John's like one of the leading experts on the O'Bannon case. So when I teach my class at Cortland and we talked about O'Bannon, I basically just, give John's articles to them and I close them off. But the O'Bannon case it was really at O'Bannon asking a question that a lot of us have had for many, many years, which is, why can't these athletes get paid for the use of their name, image, and likeness in the video games? It's something that I've asked when I worked in college athletics before I went to law school. It's something that I even questioned while I was in law school. I worked at Union College as the director of hockey operations. 2014 at Division I National Champions, had to say that, required to say that. It's on their booster club board. And our reunion is on Friday. When I was at Union, our captain, a good friend of mine, came from a small farm town in Manitoba. And he was the man on campus, the man. And when winter break came, Union's on the trimester schedule, and so we have a 7-week winter break, but the players stay on campus because we play games and everything like that. So the school, through NCAA policy, is able to to give the athletes per diem for food. And for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, each player got $20 a day. And I think, John just bought me a slice of pizza for lunch today, and I don't think it was $20, but that was one meal, and I guess it was somewhere around 10. Okay. So these kids what they ended up doing was pooling their per diem money together and buying groceries together to be able to eat during this time of the year. And I remember being like, Matt, why don't you go to the local pizza place down the street and just do some promotions for them? And this is me pre-law school, the whole thing, and I was quickly told that you can't do that, which got me to thinking, why not? You're selling T-shirts with his number on the back, and everybody's buying it. And I guess I'm guilty of purchasing those items too, because my first year at law school at Syracuse was 2013, and Tyler Ennis hit a half-court game-winning shot against Pitt, and I said, I need to have a number 11 jersey because of Tyler Ennis. And Tyler Ennis, I went down to Marshall Street, bought the jersey, put it on, and Tyler Ennis got $0 for that, even though my intent was to buy not the CJ Fair jersey, not the Rakeem Christmas jersey, but the Tyler Ennis jersey. And that's something was basically the whole thought process behind the O'Bannon case. And it was the first time the NCAA was told that you are subject to antitrust laws, which then brings us to Alston. And the one thing I do every time I have a talk about this and I talk about Alston, I have to clarify and make sure everybody's aware. The Alston case had nothing to do about NIL. It is not the NIL case. Whenever I have a client at my office and they're an agency, or they have some sort of website and their website says athletes can get paid now because of the Alston case, the first thing I make them do is remove that. Because it's not the case. This was a case about extra education-related benefits for student athletes. And it was something that was monitored by the NCAA. Obviously the NCAA was in the case, but also throughout college athletics, because if the NCAA was to lose a second antitrust case in the short amount of time, so this was happening 2020, 2021, things were going to change. The tide of public opinion was already changing, beginning with the O'Bannon case moving forward. And if you were at my last panel, I call it the athlete empowerment movement, which I think we're still going through today, and how the public opinion of how athletes' rights has changed over the years. And in the Alston decision, it was a 9-0 decision. And as anybody that follows any sort of politics these days, the Supreme Court these days, or the last 10 years, it's pretty striking that 9 people from both sides of the line were able to agree on something. Basically setting the stage of what's we see today. In that case as well, concurring opinion from Justice Kavanaugh. Pretty sure his direct quote that was picked up and ran with by media outlets is, the NCAA is not above the law. And that's what has really driven home everything that we kind of see today, all the different cases involving all different NCAA issues going forward. But you might be asking, well, Dan, you just said that the Alston case had nothing to do with NIL, so that case was decided in late June 2021, and the NCAA came out with its interim NIL policy in July 1st, 2021, so what are you talking about? And the reason behind that is that something that some people tend to forget is that in the background, not in the background, but along with the Alston case working its way through the Supreme Court, is that state legislatures throughout the country were passing laws that were making it legal for college athletes to capitalize on the name, image, and likeness, going directly against what the NCAA said. The first law was actually passed by California in 2019, and it was immediately a red flag for the NCAA, enough so where I believe they threatened to sue the NCAA, and then also, threatened to sue the state of California, and then also threatened to kick out every single California school from the NCAA, which is hilarious. Can you imagine college sports without UCLA, USC, Cal? It was, when they came out with that, I know for me as a younger lawyer at the time, thinking like, wow, the NCAA is really grasping for straws at this point. Like they better change course. And they really didn't. I think a lot of people are looking at this era as there's a lot of the sky is falling, and I think only the NCAA is mainly to blame for that. But so you have California, they passed their law, and then other states being, you know what, we want to support our athletes too, and we want to be ahead of the curve and competitive as well. So then you had other states like Florida also pass their law, and they were there. That law is notable because that was the first NIL state law to have an effective date of July 1st, 2021. So you have this combination of Alston, like any legal expert, any sort of antitrust expert knew that the NCAA was going to lose the Alston case. So that, combined with states like California, Florida, and others having their laws coming into effect, really put the NCAA on notice that, hey, this NIL thing, it's going to happen. And so a lot of people in the industry sort of assume that, okay, they're aware of this, and when it comes out and they allow it, it's going to be a fully thought out, encompassing policy. And boy, were those people wrong, including myself. The NCAA's interim policy basically said you can do NIL, can't be paid for play, you can have an attorney, follow your state law, have fun. And working in college athletics, especially people inside the schools, depending on how much you knew about it or not, it became a nightmare because schools had to create their own NIL policies, and then you had to make sure you didn't want to put your students at a disadvantage to other schools, and then you had some states that had NIL laws and some that didn't, and what became an issue so you had the states that are pushing for athletes' rights, they're pushing for NIL, and they're trying to create a fair law that is good for the NCAA, for the athletes, for the schools, and then the NCAA comes out with their essentially bare bones policy. You end up with a lot of these states that are at the forefront of pushing for these rights having more restrictive laws in the NCAA policy, putting their students at a disadvantage. But that was the exact opposite purpose of what they were trying to do there. So then what we've seen is kind of I think it was called maybe a different panel, kind of the race to the bottom when it comes to school policies and state laws and everything like that, because it's all about amending your state law to make it the most competitive, the most welcoming to your athletes, to make it more attractive. Same with your school policies. Like states like Alabama just straight up repealed their law. They're like, we don't need a law. The NCAA policy has no restrictions. Why would we put restrictions on people? Other states have not gone that route and have more tailored it back, saying all these restrictions that we have in here we're going to take them out. And then they've even gone further to be more competitive to say, the NCAA can't punish you for for not following certain NCAA, first not following certain NIL laws or rules and regulations and so on and so forth. So right now we're at this whole state law competition about which law is going to be the most permissive for their athletes. New York has amended their law, Oklahoma has amended their law, Florida, and so on and so forth. And it's really just been in the hands of lawmakers for college athletics and at athletic associations in high school as well, because high school NIL is a thing. I love seeing on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, when the state announces that they're going to do NIL at the high school level, and all the comments will being like, what? Like, they're allowing high school students to NIL? Like, the sky is going to fall. And then it's like, states have been allowing this for 3 years. There's almost 40 states that allow it at the high school level at this point. So everything is still kind of in flux. And I know Jim will talk about the federal stuff, and there's some uniformity there, but the NCAA has kind of created this mess for themselves by not being at the forefront of trying to corral these issues before they exploded in their face, because everybody sort of knew that was going to happen. And also, when they allowed it, kind of just throwing everybody, like to the lions. It's like, you figure it out, screw you. Schools, we're not going to give any guidance. We'll let it be a free-for-all. State legislatures that are helping, through law, like, you can do whatever you want through laws, we don't care. And it's kind of just created all the issues we have now involved with NIL, and then mixed in with the transfer portal and employment and everything that we talked about in some of our other panels and we might touch on today. But that's kind of where we are today. There's still a lot of confusion, a lot of uncertainty about what state law says what school policies say what the NCAA allows, what it doesn't, and how every single rule change alters it. I mentioned in my other panel, for those that were there, the NCAA mentioned, just said that they can't, they're not going to test for cannabis anymore. It's not a banned substance. So depending on your state law and depending on your school policy, there are certain college athletes can now do a cannabis game. But it will depend on your state law and your school policy, which for 18, 19, 20-year-olds, it's not the easiest thing to navigate, and it's important to have certain people in your corner to help you in those situations. It's not an easy situation at all for anybody. Even as a lawyer that is obsessive about all this stuff, keeping up with the day-to-day changes is hard. So I can only imagine what it's like to be an athlete, of having to go to school, basically being a full-time athlete at your school and trying to deal with all this stuff as well. It's extremely difficult, but I'll leave it at that.
Okay. With attorneys on the panel, I had to make sure they had, a little runway, but I wanted to keep them a little tighter too. Yeah, I need the bell, right? Two things, if I can just make two clarifications. First one, with the Alston case, while Justice Kavanaugh's concurring opinion is cited a lot, nobody joined him in that. He was by himself. So there was the 8 justices with the majority decision, and Kavanaugh's over here by himself, which kind of raises an interesting question as to what would happen. Are the other 8 justices, will they eventually join him in that kind of view? And we can talk more about that as well. The other thing is, you said that nobody thought the NCAA was going to win. I'm pretty sure the NCAA thought they were going to win.
Just that.
Just so somebody did think they were going to win, just wasn't most of the other legal commentators. Jack, I'll let you take us to the present.
Awesome, thank you. July 1st, 2021 rolls around. I was interning at an athlete marketing agency that summer, helping professional athletes partner up with brands. I had the chance to work with athletes like Tyreek Hill, De'Aaron Fox, helping them collaborate with brands like Bojangles Fried Chicken. I remember it was one of the first deals I had worked on. And like I said, July 1st comes and there's now new legislation that announces that college athletes can partner up with brands. So the first place my mind goes is, all right, so everything that I've been learning this summer can now be applied to athletes that I'm sitting next to in the class. So I head back to Syracuse University for my junior year of college, and I'm passing businesses to go get lunch at, and I recognize that, I mean, there are athletes that can help promote these businesses and bring extra traffic. There are businesses that can benefit from leveraging athletes as a marketing tactic. So I started a business called Out to Win Sports, and it's helping my peers, student athletes, connect with brands, connect with businesses locally, first at Syracuse, and over the course of time expanded across all sports at Syracuse, then onto other campuses. So working with athletes across Michigan, Southern California, and Oklahoma to start, and eventually through facilitating campaigns between brands and athletes, came across the realization pretty early that it didn't just matter how you were performing on the field as an athlete. It was really about how you can move the needle off the field as a marketer. Not only marketing yourselves, but marketing a brand. How could you move the needle, take their marketing budget, and help them see a return on their investment? So over, again, the course of time, building out campaigns, working with brands like Reebok, Crocs, Nerf, Oakley, helping them work with athletes not only at Syracuse, but athletes across the country, not just holding up the product with their thumbs up, smiling, saying this is my favorite water bottle in the market, but creating content that actually helped these brands move the needle. And what we recognized as we were helping more brands build out campaigns, really taking a focus on how can we help brands see a return on their investment was, let's be real, not every athlete is going to be the right fit for your brand, but who is? And in most cases, brands were taking shots in the dark regarding which athletes actually fit the campaigns they were building. You know, taking a look at how many touchdowns they were throwing, how many baskets they were scoring, and saying, all right, this guy can represent my brand. But in reality, when you think about how a brand spends their marketing budget, it's more taking into account what target audience am I looking to reach, what demographic is going to be buying my product. There wasn't data available in the market that allowed brands to better understand the athletes they were partnering with, the audiences they were going to be reaching through these partnerships. So fast forward from my junior year of college at Syracuse, 3 years later, we've launched a new product that allows brands to better understand the marketability of an athlete once entering a deal with them. So, John, if you want to play the video. So this is just a quick background into the product that we recently launched. I'm excited to introduce the first ever athlete marketing intelligence platform built by Out to Win Sports. Every brand wants to build an athlete marketing campaign, but they lack the resources and data they need to make informed decisions on which athletes to partner with. That's why we built the Athlete Marketing Intelligence Platform. Our software creates a seamless process for finding the athletes who best fit your brand, leveraging data analytics and AI recommendation algorithms. Our platform hosts a comprehensive database of nearly all college athletes, sortable by criteria like estimated price per post, and our proprietary Out to Win score algorithm, representative of an athlete's social media marketability strength. Our Discover page provides recommended partners based on the target reach of your upcoming campaign and helps you find a diamond in the rough athlete creators trending on social media. Each athlete's individual profile is filled with hundreds of data-backed insights, allowing you to get a holistic view of an athlete's social media metrics and audience demographics. Sign up for the Athlete Marketing Intelligence Platform to build successful athlete creator campaigns and reach engaged sports audiences like never before. So, obviously, the recognition was let's help brands make more informed decisions through providing them with the data analytics that they need to feel more confident in the athletes they're partnering with. Upon graduating Syracuse in 2023, I left Syracuse. I thought I was done there for good. I said my goodbyes, and I received a call a couple weeks later from the athletic director, Mr. Wildhack, who unfortunately wasn't able to make it this weekend, inviting us back to partner up with them and help them build upon their NIL program. So for the past year, we at Out to Win Sports were working in partnership with Syracuse Athletics to help athletes better understand their marketability and leverage that into partnering with brands, making money now that they're able to do so. And one of the core realizations we came across in doing so was not every athlete's necessarily cut out for being a content creator and putting themselves out there in the fashion that seems to be promoted in this platform that we built. And we're not here necessarily to start pushing athletes in those directions, forcing them into doing things that they have no interest in. Frankly, as a brand, there are 500,000 existing athletes, and let's say 85% of them don't create content, don't have a strong personal brand that sets out from others. And I think what's really special is that there is a 10 to 15% that do, but they're really difficult to find. And now that NIL exists, there's a new opportunity for brands, businesses to tap into the culture on college campuses, which is driving a lot of brands' marketing strategy in today's era. But again, those athletes that can really help these brands move the needle are difficult to find. So the platform that we created is really, it's focused on helping brands better identify diamond in the rough athletes across campuses. And I guess just diving deeper now into, of course, why we're here to discuss NIL legislation, and for obvious reasons, it's impacted the business that we've built. When I first started Out to Win at Syracuse, I had to get my athlete agent license to be able to represent athletes at Syracuse in the state of New York. But then if I wanted to work at Michigan, I had to get a license in Michigan. If I wanted to work in California, I had to get a license in California. So there were certain guidelines that I had to put in place in order to actually be allowed to legally represent athletes. And this was in the first phase of the business before we went on to launch the software. But what I guess learned over the course of building a business was that there's a lot of confusion in the NIL landscape. So Dan talked about the past, Jim's going to talk about the future, just to talk a little bit about the present and what I've learned over the last 3 years of being feet on the ground within it. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of gray area. And I'm hoping that those are things that change over the course of the next couple of years. I know there are big discussions occurring on a consistent basis within Congress, but it's put people like myself and people on the brand side, people on the university side, athletes themselves in very difficult situations, I think, on a common occurrence where there are gray areas where you have to make decisions based on legislation that technically exists, but if you don't necessarily follow it, what are the consequences? There's a lack of enforcement of a lot of the legislation that's been put out there. So if I didn't necessarily have that license in Michigan, was I going to jail? Was I getting sued? No one was going to have any idea. So I was put in a moral dilemma where I had to decide, am I going to pay a few $100s to get this license in a state that I was operating in when no one was ever going to ask me for it? And of course, I like to think of myself as a positive player in the NIL space, and maybe not everyone is going about it with the same mindset of looking to provide positive value. So it definitely made me think at times, what does this mean for others who are thinking about starting similar businesses that might be at it for the wrong reasons? There wasn't really anything put in place to prevent that. So now, as I'm more collaborating with brands on a consistent basis and helping them better understand how they can leverage athletes to build marketing campaigns, there's fear on the brand side. They think, well, what if I work with an athlete and they break the rules, and because of that, I'm the reason that this athlete is ineligible to play in their ACC championship. And I can say, look, that's probably not going to happen. I've never seen that happen. As I mentioned, this lack of enforcement that exists currently, I mean, it's something that we've seen examples where schools have been tapped for doing certain things within recruitment that crosses the line of what's allowed and what isn't. But realistically, on the brand side, there are certain rules that are spoken about regarding the licensing of the schools that can be used, regarding where and when an athlete can promote your product. And those rules need to be discussed and educated on in conversations with these brands, and it adds a whole other layer into these relationships that just adds complexity. It adds fear, as I mentioned. So as we continue to navigate the NIL space with my business, Out to Win Sports, which is generally with hoping and pushing for athletes to land more opportunities to earn money, but also really gain career development opportunities by collaborating with brands. we're big advocates for setting much more specific legislation in place, much more specific rules that can allow everyone to take a deep breath and not feel like there's this potential fear, there's this potential consequence that can come from maybe not going about these relationships the right way.
All right. Well, there might be some confusion at the state level. Jim here is going to clarify everything at the federal level for us.
There's no confusion. Hi, everyone. Jim Flood. Nice to see you. So I'd like to do sort of three things. First, I'd like to talk about sort of what is the state of play in Congress right now in terms of thinking about legislation and what is it that drives a bill, like really makes a bill happen in Congress. Secondly, I'd like to sort of talk about if a bill was to pass, what would the pieces be? What would the issues be in the bill? And third, I'd like to talk about sort of the probability of the politics all coming together to make that happen. So let's start at bucket number one, which is sort of, how does an issue get to the point where Congress decides they want to act? So you see issues, Congress is always behind the business community. So you're never going to look to Congress to be ahead of the business curve. They're always behind the curve. Typically what happens when you see a novel issue in technology in the business community, crypto is a good example of this, cryptocurrency. You're seeing it now in the marijuana space with 37, 40 some odd states that have legalized it, where now you have issues. It's legal here in this state, but it's not legal in the next state. So now we're having problems because people are crossing borders. These are the situations in which we have a federal system and Congress is supposed to pass a federal law if there's sufficient national interest such that it's no longer a state issue, really, it's a federal issue. This issue, I think, is reaching that point. Secondly, Congress members, there are 435 members of the House, 100 senators, 535 members of Congress. To give you a little insight into sort of the world that I live in and I lived in, on a Monday, if you're a member of Congress, all of you come from different states, you'll fly into Washington, D.C. You'll wake up on Tuesday and you'll do a hearing in the morning, maybe a hearing in the afternoon Tuesday, maybe another one on Wednesday. Those hearings and the topics get planned a week or two in advance. And when they're planning it, the staffers, they're like, well, what are issues that are important to our constituents that are going to get us good press as members of Congress, because we're incredible press creatures. We want to get out there and get good press to get reelected, and that are that don't have significant downside. If I do this, is going to be a big problem. I knew that this issue met sort of the first test here in that it's an issue that's important to constituents. When I watched about a week and a half ago in preparation for this session, I sat for several hours watching congressional hearings, and there was a hearing on lots of different issues. And 5 minutes for each member. You get to ask your questions, your questions, your questions. They got to a House member, I think it was from Georgia. And as a New Yorker, I won't do my best, I'll spare you my best Southern accent, but he basically said, he opened up, and he's got Charlie Baker in front of him, and several athletes and others, and instead of getting into any specific issues, he said, y'all need to fix college football. And that was it. That was all he cared about. It was clear, like his message was, you fix this college football thing or I'm going to pass a law that you're not going to like. And I knew immediately, every single member of Congress, and by the way, one by one, the first thing they talked about is, oh, look at the University of Michigan, Congresswoman Dingell was talking about, and what a great school it is. And first we'll write a bill together and then we'll get a sponsor. We need members of Congress to introduce legislation. So I looked at, anybody could look up www.congress.gov, and you'll find 10, 15, 20 plus NIL bills. What does that tell you? There's a lot of interest across the board, okay? The next thing you want to do is you have to go through what they call regular order. My bill gets assigned to a committee. Lots of bills, every committee could have 1,000 bills sitting in the committee that are not going anywhere. So for your bill to move, you have to get the chair and the ranking member to say, this is important to me, I want to hold a hearing, let's move this. That has happened several times in the House and the Senate. Several committees have decided NIL bills are important enough, I want to bring them up for committee discussion. Then you have a committee vote, what they call, every week every committee has what they call a markup session, where they vote on bills. Now that's where we kind of are right now. No committee that I know of has marked up and moved the bill out of committee. So it's sort of like you built the foundation, the first floor, you're trying to build a 5-story building, you're on the second floor now, and that's sort of where you are. To move from where you are now to get over the finish line, you need an external force, or you need an incentive to push them. What is the incentive? Well, the incentive could be We'll enter September, it's college football season, and, something happens, or somebody gets all annoyed at the super conferences, et cetera, and it becomes a political issue. The college football issue is a big issue, I would think, more for the Republican than the Democratic Party, because look at the states where the big football teams and the big conferences are. If you go out and basically say, we, the Republican Party, want
New
to
York.
save college football. You got,
Big football, New York?
yes, sorry. Is New York?
Let's
New
be
York
clear.
But what New York has is, of course, the current Senate Majority Leader, Senator Schumer, but maybe soon to be, hopefully not, Minority Leader. So I think the pieces are there, but we need to get from the third floor to the fifth floor. What is going to drive us? A crisis would drive us. God forbid some poor kid had a terrible NIL contract and lost everything, or there's some major crisis or problem that drives us. Or you wake up on Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon and you turn on your TV and you're not getting your college football. Or March Madness, which you've been waiting for all year, is all of a sudden not happening. So what is the driver that's going to drive them to move this thing forward? I don't think there's going to be a driver this fall, but there may be a driver as we go into a new year. We are ending a 2-year Congress. If you're a member of Congress, you get sworn in for 2 years. So I think it's the 118th Congress is ending now at the end of December. There'll be the election in November. We start the new Congress. We start all over again. Maybe in the lame duck session at the end of the year. The lame duck session is the 6 weeks after an election where we decide, look, why do we need to fight anymore? The election's over. I want something in a bill. You want something in a bill. Let's just get the bill done and let's move the bill. So the issue is ripe in the Congress. It's a question of timing, and it's a question of what's going to move it sort of more quickly. Now, let's briefly, what's going to be in it? I think the best bill to move in Congress is a bill called, it's basically the Fair Accountability, Integrity, and Representation Act. It's a bill by Congressman and Chairman Bill Arrakis, Gus Bill Arrakis from Florida. What does it do? The first thing it does is it would preempt state law. Now, that should be pretty logical. If you pass a federal law, it preempts state law. Second thing it would do is basically protect student rights. This is a big issue for Democrats. They talk a lot about protecting student rights. And that would be by creating something like a student bill of rights, a student NIL bill of rights. The third thing it does is it goes after pay to play. There's a lot of complaining to Congress about, when you combine the transfer portal with NIL promises, you get all these kids to move through the portal because they're being promised better NIL money at school number 2 than they're getting at school number 1, technically a violation of the NCAA rules anyway, but nobody's doing anything about it. What else is in the fair bill? There is a transparency section that says all agents, all sponsors, all collectives, all third-party agents would have to register if this legislation passes. Well, who would they register with? Well, that's the next part of the bill, would be to create a thing called the U.S. Intercollegiate College Athletic, U.S. Intercollegiate College Athletic Association. And basically, that's where the big fight is now. The NCAA says, I know we've been a bad boy, we didn't do that good, we should have addressed this earlier, but we are still the entity through which this should happen. Some of the schools are saying, no, you should run this through the schools. Congress is saying, no, well, wait a minute, we need to create a new entity, which we often do in Congress, because then we can instruct them, they're our baby, we created them, we can bring them up to the Hill for hearings to make sure they're doing a good job. When they don't do a good job, we can blame them and punish them, and we can't control the NCAA or the schools the way we control this organization. What else would it do? I mean, you'd be amazed at some of the, may seem like smaller issues that Charlie Baker's focused on, that they would include in the bill. Better student health insurance. A big concern about a lot of students basically, getting injured, not having enough coverage. They would want the academic money to last at least the full 4 years. If you get hurt, you're an athlete. The athletic and the academic money, we want you to continue to pay for this kid to get their way through college. There are some thorny issues. What do you do about international students? Should they get NIL? Should they not get NIL? What are you doing about Olympic students? What are you doing about Title IX? I mean, this is a huge, what's going on here? Are football and basketball the only sports and colleges in America? Obviously, particularly Democrats are pushing big time. They would probably put a provision in that would expand the scope of Title IX. So these are the sort of issues they're talking about, and it's not just this one bill. They'll take ideas from other bills in order to get other members to vote for it and put it together. And now the when. I don't think it's going to happen this year. They're working, this fair bill in the House is what they call a discussion draft. That's a good sign because it normally means they get the votes for it in advance, and then when they introduce it, it's baked. They have the votes, they're ready to move. But because of the election and because all they're passing are bills they must pass, like the National Defense Authorization Act to authorize the military, I don't think it gets done this year. Maybe in lame duck if there was some big impetus. I think we start again at the beginning of next year when they're going through their issues and we do it. Now, that could change tomorrow if major universities in America, I'm talking chancellors pick up the phone, Chancellor at Syracuse picks up the phone and calls Senator Schumer and says, time out. This is a desperate issue for us. We need you to move now. And that the phone starts ringing in office after office after office. But short of that, I think in the next 3 years, legislation gets done. And those are some of the pieces in it. And thank you, John.
Okay. Normally at the other presentations, it's time for me to ask questions directly to the panelists, but I'm going to open it up. You guys don't need to hear my questions. So if you have any questions for the individual panelists, please just raise your hand and go ahead. Otherwise, I will ask questions.
Can you repeat the name of that, the fair bill again? What's the whole name of it?
Yeah, it's the, I knew you were going to ask me, it's the Fairness, Accountability, and Integrity in the Representation of College Athletes Act. If you Google Bilirakis, Bilirakis, Google Bilirakis and NIL, and you'll get information on his hearing that he ran. He runs a subcommittee of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. They did a hearing in January, and there's a whole discussion about the bill and the pieces of the bill and all of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you think the government will do anything about helping manage the disbursement of funds that might be coming in from private equity to help some of the schools? Because on the women's sports side, you'd be worried about that distribution or lack of distribution to women's sports.
So it's an interesting question. I think they'll address the broader issue of the fairness and equity across the board and between men's and women's sports, and that will fall into sort of that broader bucket. I know the private equity issue keeps coming up in the context of what if we take football and lift it up and put it over here and just let private equity and venture capital invest in it and make it like a separate business entity. I think the Democrats are the ones that are principally complaining about the lack of Title IX enforceability in the NIL context, obviously. And I think it's going to be a broader issue. Like, we need to protect, women's sports, other sports. Is Congress going to come in and say, you have 50 sports at your college that we will protect them forever? No. But I think what's going to happen is as you start to see sports cut, if that happens because of the House decision or otherwise, that's when members are going to step in. Don't forget, members of Congress are people too. Imagine, and they went to college and they played sports, and there are a lot of them. And so they are going to step in at some point. The question is, what is the tipping point going to be when they get mad enough to step in?
But the PE money changes the dynamics because now they're under pressure for returning, right? And so if you are a Division I school where the majority of your revenue is coming from football, then you're going to be putting all your power behind that and not doing volleyball as an example. And I think the challenge will be that government isn't going to notice this happens until after it happens.
Fair enough, but there are it's not just Congress. I think the Department of Justice can get involved. I think there are other ways that, look, if you take $1 of federal money as a university, the federal government has a strong hold over you and have multiple avenues of enforcement. If it's purely the business proposition of PE money with the school, even though there's a bad outcome, there's a reluctance in Congress to get involved. I think you have to, sometimes sadly, the bad act has to happen, and then when it happens, that's the public event that touches them, that makes them act. They're not always preemptive.
And we have athletes beginning this year, traveling from California to New Jersey, Washington, down to Maryland. So I think athlete welfare is kind of another question that kind of is pushed aside, especially with those schools in the Big Ten, and nobody's really addressing that either. Especially the volleyball team as they travel across country for a Monday night game. Good luck getting to class on Tuesday or even Wednesday, right?
Is today's NIL tracked and reported? Because what I'm wondering, I lived in the days of Reggie Bush and before that, where there was a lot of soft incentives. So my question is, even if a system is created and supposedly money's tracked, what are we still going to do about all those soft benefits that was going on and probably might still be going on? So I guess my ultimate question is, what's the mechanism to make sure everything stays on board, above board?
Just one other brief thing. So, two things. If I'm not mistaken, there's a NCAA rule now which at least suggests that if you're taking NIL, you're supposed to, I think it's mandatory actually, you're supposed to report to your school on the contract and the amounts and all that sort of stuff. What Congress has put into the FAIR Act, which is interesting, is they want to make NIL subject to Federal Trade Commission jurisdiction. So they want, what does that mean in plain English? So if you're running a company and you get in trouble, you don't want it to be the Department of Justice, that's my old employer, that's overseeing you, because now you're in criminal territory. But the Federal Trade Commission is responsible for unfair trade practices, consumer protection violations, et cetera. They can issue a $10 million fine against a university or a collective or a bad actor. So most of the legislation I've seen is going the route of the FTC. And then they'll tell the Federal Trade Commission, come up with rulemaking, federal rulemaking that will apply to this space.
There are different mechanisms out there right now of tracking how much the deal is worth, how much the average deal is, what's being done, but it's not consistent, it's not fully encompassing. You have companies like Student Athlete NIL that runs a bunch of NIL collectors throughout the country, and they have their data and they report their data like that it's what everybody else is doing, which I know is, they're in the ballpark, don't get me wrong, they do a nice job, but I work with clients that are collectives that don't work with Student Athlete NIL, and they don't have to report all their deals that they're doing or anything like that. I think what Jim was alluding to is things starting in August, athletes that do deals for over $600, if they report the details of their deal to the school, they can get the benefit, like other sort of athletic help and benefits that they provide for NIL purposes. I think it's something like that. But at the same time, NIL at its core is student athletes being able to exercise their right of publicity, being paid for the use of their name, image, and likeness. So what's to say that a private contract between two separate parties needs to be reported? Because why do their contracts have to be reported when you're going to be promoting Nike or Coca-Cola or whoever, while nobody else has to disclose those deals anyways? And it also comes to the issue if you're writing a contract, dealing with confidentiality clauses. A standard influencer contract will have a confidentiality language, and now with the schools and everything like that, I always try to build in that the contract may be disclosed to the school or governing body or organization that may want to do it, or may be disclosed under FOIA. So the whole confidentiality disclosure, how much is actually happening out there, is difficult, and there's people that are out there trying to do it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so with every deal that's facilitated across college athletics, there's a requirement to report that deal to compliance, and that can be as simple as an email to the compliance director, at least in most cases, stating the deal and the deliverables and the price. And notice I said reported, so it doesn't necessarily need to be approved, it just has to be reported. So like in one case, there was a partnership that went out, this was back in 2021, so a lot was still just being learned, but we reported the deal and it went out. The athlete posted the deal on social media, and the compliance director responded after the deal had already been put out, saying that there was something that had to be changed within, like there was an S logo in the background of the video, something along those lines, so he asked us to take it down. And ever since, like there's been discussions about changing that from should the deal have to be reported or should it have to be approved, or where is the middle ground between that so occurrences like that don't happen. But then in addition to that, similar to an influencer marketing relationship, athletes need to use hashtag ad, hashtag sponsored, at least just to specify the fact that this is a partnership, a paid partnership, paid promotion of whatever product or service they're endorsing.
That's the law. That's an FTC law.
Yep.
If I teach that in my class, if you're putting hashtag ad the end of your Instagram post like I used to do when I was 19 and I thought it was hilarious. It's a real thing. You have to do it. It's the rules.
So Zach Edey, at the end of his college career, was talking about how much money he's lost out on because he's from Canada and he wasn't able to get in on NIL. Do you think that they'll start including laws to protect foreign students who are able to make that kind of money?
The Democrats want to do it, the Republicans are less amenable. To be really honest with you, there's got to be a compelling reason for them to want to do it. One might sit here and believe that it's just fair, it's fairness, why not just do it? But these are political creatures, and so, I mean, it would have to be a compromise between the two of them.
They should.
Yeah, it was really tough for me being on the ground at Syracuse. A lot of athletes are from from different countries, and as we're talking about the opportunities, I have to then specify, yeah, sorry, you can't do this, they can, and it's terrible. I'm less involved in on the political, legal jargon side of it all. So being on the ground and needing to explain it was difficult. And I'm 100% hoping that it's legislation that can be figured out across as soon as possible.
Here's a question for all of you. If we're going to include international athletes in this, and somehow they are employees of the universities, and I know we're not talking there, we're just talking NIL. Do we then have to change their visa from student visa to an employment visa, which also makes it a lot harder for them to come into the country to start with? Because we don't just give out employment visas to internationals. Messi, yes. Hockey player at Union, no.
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify, just because you're an international student here on F1 visa doesn't mean you flat out cannot do NIL. You still can under very specific circumstances. I write contracts involving international athletes from all over the world, and there's certain ways that it can happen. The short story of it is that it either has to be like a part of their education, which doesn't really fly usually when you're doing an NIL deal, but the main way around it is to go back to their home country and perform the deliverables of the deal. So, was it a few years ago, one of the best basketball players in college basketball was Oscar Tshiebwe, I probably just butchered his name, but for Kentucky. Kentucky went down for a bunch of games in the Bahamas, and while his team was practicing, he spent the time shooting marketing deals, signing autographs, so he could get paid a lot of money. The Zach Edey thing had brought things to attention, but I guess Edey didn't have people around him to help make it happen. I'm a part of deals for international athletes they're far less popular than Zach Edey. It is possible, and if there's going to be any sort of change here, it's going to have to be done by a change in the immigration code. I don't think there's going to be a different type of visa or anything like that, but that's the real issue because, as John said, if athletes become employees, that's really going to screw over the athletes that are here on F1 visas, as was discussed before with the Dartmouth basketball team unionizing. There's international athletes on that team. That's going to screw with their visa if they're going to be unionized employees. It's a very complicated issue, and I know people in the immigration law world, I deal with a lot of different aspects of sports law and NIL law. When it comes to immigration law, I outsource myself to a very good sports immigration attorney that knows exactly what you're doing because the consequences are so high if you get it wrong, because you will get deported if you break those rules, and that's something I'm not willing to get legal on.
So we got one last question right there.
Yeah, it's just a follow-up for your international students. Those international companies who are doing NIL deals with these students, do they have a footprint in home country or just footprint around the U.S. and other countries where they can have those deliverables but still benefits them in their business structure and those other countries around the world?
Yeah, it doesn't matter where the brand or the third party is located. It's all about where the athlete is located and they're in compliance with their visa. Some people have argued in the early days of this, a person can do their social media post in California, but as long as the money goes to their bank account in Ireland, they're fine. It's all the immigration attorneys that I know said that's not true. So you're just sending out an Instagram post, that's not real work. No, it is. You're doing work and you're getting paid for it. There's a lot of specifics there, and the stakes are extremely high for those athletes.
Okay. It looks like that's enough. That is the time we had today. I know our guests the panelists will stick around for answer questions. But thank you for joining us, and thank Dan, Jack, and Jim for a great presentation.